Welcome back. A very important change is coming for airplane bathrooms. The U.S. Department of Transportation is now requiring single aisle airplanes to have accessible lavatories for people with disabilities. What else is needed to make the air travel experience fully accessible for people with disabilities? Joining us to tell us some more is the Chief Policy Officer at Paralyzed Veterans of America, Heather Ansley. Heather, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me today.
So to start off, the U.S. Department of Transportation's recent requirement for accessible lavatories on airplanes is a significant step towards improving air travel for people with disabilities. Can you explain the key provisions of this new DOT rule?
Sure. What it means is that passengers with disabilities, particularly those who are wheelchair users, will have access to an aircraft lavatory on a larger single aisle aircraft to be able to take care of their basic bodily needs. Today, they often have to dehydrate themselves, maybe fast, perhaps for even as long as a day as they try to prepare for that flight that isn't going to have access to the lavatory. It may even mean in some cases that they have to soil themselves because they don't have access. So we're glad that this battle is finally, at least we've got a date certain when we'll have accessible lavatories on single aisle aircraft. But more work still needs to be done.
Absolutely. And I mean, I wanted to ask a little bit about the challenges that people with disabilities face when going on a plane. And you mentioned a few of them. Can you just elaborate on how important it is that we have this rule and what are some of the challenges that they may face?
Sure. So having access to a lavatory is, a basic human civil right that all people need to have access to in flight. If you're going from, New York to LA, you want to know that you're able to use the restroom if that's something that you need to do. Unfortunately, not having access to a lavatory, which right now somebody who is mobility impaired can't do. Um, there's also other issues and challenges that people face in air travel, including difficulties just even getting on and off the aircraft. What happens to the person's wheelchair when it's being, stowed in the belly of the aircraft to make the trip? There's lots and lots of challenges that people with disabilities have to face in air travel, and unfortunately, access to the laboratory is just one of them.
Yeah, as you mentioned, I mean, the lavatories itself are one issue in itself. And I know, I've heard stories of, like you mentioned, people with wheelchairs that they don't necessarily know where their wheelchair is going and they get off the flight and they find out that it's broken or it's been lost and there's little to no care for it. So can you tell me a little bit about the significance that this rule holds for the disabled community?
What this rule means is it's a recognition that passengers with disabilities should have dignified access to take care of their basic human needs. It's not something that we've had in place in the decades that we've now had a law requiring access for people with disabilities. You had to be on a twin aisle aircraft. To have a requirement to be able just to use a lavatory. And those don't fly much in the US anymore, maybe if you're going internationally. So, this will mean that in the future, people with disabilities that are taking those domestic cross country flights will know that in the event they need to use a lavatory, that there will be one that is available to them, that they can access behind a closed door with somebody to assist them if that's what they need. And we just think that this is a really big step forward for all passengers with disabilities.
Absolutely. And Paralyzed Veterans of America has been at the forefront of advocating for accessibility in air travel for over 35 years. So, can you share some insights into the history of PVA's advocacy efforts and the role it played in bringing about this groundbreaking rule?
Certainly. So PVA has, as you said, been involved for decades in trying to improve access to air travel for people with disabilities. This goes all the way to the passage of the law, the Air Carrier Access Act, that actually ensures non discrimination in air travel for people with disabilities. And we started pretty soon after that trying to get access to lavatories. Fast forward in 2016, we participated in a what they call a rulemaking, negotiated rulemaking, working with other stakeholders like the airlines, like people who make airplanes, and tried to come up with a path forward so that we could say there will be a date certain in the future when people with disabilities will have lavatory access. Fast forward, here we are today. We have a date certain that will go into effect this October, and that then kicks off a time clock that within a decade, or at the end of a decade, we will have that accessible lavatory on larger single aisle aircraft. But we call on airlines to act more quickly
Hmm.
because passengers with disabilities shouldn't have to wait any longer to be able to have a safe, dignified, humane experience in air travel.
100%. And in your view and your perspective, can you tell me a little bit about why has air travel lagged behind in meeting these fundamental accessibility standards?
One of the reasons it's really lagged behind, as I mentioned, there's the Air Carrier Access Act, and that's what governs access to air travel. And it doesn't have some of the accessibility requirements for aircraft that you might see in a different law that you might be more familiar with, the Americans with Disabilities Act. The Americans with Disabilities Act governs access to buses and trains and subways, lots of modes of transportation, and you'll see more accessibility features on those particular modes of transportation. Aircraft, on the other hand, because they're under the Air Carrier Access Act, they don't have a lot of those types of requirements, and it shows in terms of the experience of passengers with disabilities, the fact that we have people getting injured just trying to get on and off the aircraft, and then again, people being separated from their wheelchairs because the wheelchair has to travel in the belly of the aircraft most of the time while the person is in the cabin. That's not the case on a train or a bus or many of the other modes of transportation that people use every day.
Absolutely. And as we wrap up, can you tell our viewers interested in supporting these efforts what are some actions they can take?
Certainly. So, what we need is for viewers to contact their members of Congress, their representative, and two senators. Let them know that in the upcoming FAA Reauthorization Act, which is pending in Congress, that they want to see meaningful reforms to assist passengers with disabilities. Members of Congress need to hear from their constituents about the importance of doing this. We also call on folks to go to pva.org/air travel to learn more about our efforts and also to check out our Just Plain Wrong campaign.
Heather, I want to thank you so much for joining us today and sharing this information with us.
Thank you for having me.
For more information, you can visit their website at pva.org. Don't go anywhere. We'll be back with more Open right after this.